Hello, Elder High Priestess Tehila here from the Covenant of the Open Mind. You're watching Astrology 101. This is lecture 8. It's our final lecture. This should be short, I hope. This time we're going to be talking about electional, medical, and divinatory astrology. Not necessarily in that order. These are all alternatives for what we were just talking about in the first 7 lectures, which is natal astrology. A lot of the concepts will still apply over here. So like the meanings of all the zodiacal signs, the meanings of the planets, and the meanings of the houses all remain the same. So did the aspects. So this is just interpreting similar information with a different purpose in mind. For electional, if the slide will ever switch, for electional astrology, this is basically astrological forecasting in order to determine when the optimal time for some event is. And that event could be a wedding, a business opening, it could be the filing of a lawsuit, the initiation of a new project, the initiation into a group or organization. So the astrological forecasting is basically just determining where everything is going to be and when. And for the Covenant of the Open Mind, I actually do this for everyone in like 6-month batches and post that in our online community. And I'm thinking about turning that into a formal newsletter at some point so that everyone can be informed, because it can be hard to sit down and pull this information out of Stellarium yourself. So for those of us who do want to use accurate information, I want to make that more accessible to everyone, since it's not easy to. I realize that not everyone is like me and likes poring over Stellarium and flipping through one day at a time and watching how a planet moves across the sky. It's funny because last week we talked about my chart, so go ahead and find that in my chart. I'm sure it's in there. But anyway, okay, so the first thing that you would do is you would create an inceptional figure. And what this is it's the chart that you want, that you would like to have, if you could have any chart you wanted, for whatever the event is. So you would sit down with the flat wheel and you'd be like, okay, I want this to be rising and this planet to be here and that planet to be there, and you probably would leave out the higher resonance planets because they move very slowly. So most of the time their movement isn't going to affect the day-to-day. They're more like affecting people on a generational level. But sometimes they can affect the day-to-day, particularly if they're retrograde. So that is something you definitely want to keep track of, even if you don't put the high resonance planets into the inceptional figure. You might still consider whether or not it matters if they're retrograde. So then you would use an astronomical tool like Stellarium. I'm sure that there are people out there that use astrological tools. I advise against it, as I've said this whole series. Having corrected data matters. I can't stress that enough. So what you would do though is you'd get up like Stellarium and you would just, you would progress through the months first, watching the slower planets like Jupiter and Saturn. So you would like watch them move, maybe even Uranus. Watch them move, wait till they get to the position you want them to be in. And then you could increment by the day and watch the slow, I put slower on the slide here, I have to correct that. Watch the faster moving planets, like Mercury and Venus, which you'd watch by the day because they move a lot faster. So they'll very quickly get into another sign, and the moon especially, which is in like 4 signs a day or something like that. So one thing to note is that moon magic, like doing spells for bringing things to you, like improving on something or starting a new thing, doing those types of spells on the waxing moon, and then doing banishing magic on the waning moon. That's electional astrology. That's like as basic as it gets. Recognizing that the different phases of the moon have an impact on your ability to do different kinds of magic. And when the moon is full, that's the easiest time for people to do divination and open their third eyes. And that's all electional astrology. So if you were to sit down and say, when do I want to do this spell? Okay, well, Mars is in this sign in a couple weeks and it'll be the full moon. So I think I'm going to do the spell like the day before the full moon, because that's when Mercury is in this sign and it hasn't transitioned out yet, or whatever, right? You'd sit down and figure out what the best time is. And maybe doing a whole inceptional figure is too much work. And so in that case, you would just decide on like the key planets, like the sun, the moon, and this will also help you determine what time to do something. Like, should you do a ritual in the morning or in the evening? You know, we do our Yule ritual at sunrise. That's electional magic. Right? We want to do ritual at the same time the sun is rising, and whatever constellation it's in will affect our magic. So that is electional astrology. You're already probably at least familiar with like moon and solar alignments, but looking up where the other planets are is just as valid as, you know, caring about which phase of the moon we're in when you're decided to do a spell. So I think that electional would come the most naturally to people who are just getting into astrology. Like maybe you sit down and do your natal chart and that takes you like an hour, hour and a half, and then you never touch astrology again except for like every so often deciding when to do something. That's probably how most people will use astrology. So that's called electional astrology. The second type I have in here is horary astrology, often pronounced hooray, but that's a mispronunciation. It is essentially divination. It's also called interrogatory or divinatory astrology. The way this works is that you ask questions about the future, the same that you would with any form of divination, but the answers will come from the moment the question is asked. The moment, as it's called, is the precise time at which the querent can no longer stand it and they have to know the answer absolutely right now, or it could be the time that the querent asked the philosopher or the astrologer and the astrologer said, yes, I understand the question. It could be that moment. It depends on who you ask, so everyone's going to have their own personal preference. It's not like it really matters, okay, because what you're doing is you're taking an arbitrary moment in time and you're interpreting the locations of the planets right now to give some amount of you know, context to your own subconscious mind so that you can then yourself interpret what you think is going to happen, and based on transits of planets and the context of the person's life. Maybe you'll also do their natal chart first, you know, so you see how the movements of the planets will affect them, and then you can use all of that to come to some kind of understanding of what's going to happen. Most of the work, as with all forms of divination, is being done by the subconscious mind, and it's really your own subconscious that's tapping into the timelessness of reality and determining what is likely to happen in the future based on, in this case, not tarot or runestones, but on the locations of the planets in the sky right now. If the astrologer and the querent are separated by distance, then it can be either the astrologer's, the querent's location. It could be a calculated location, maybe something that's like halfway in between, or the location of some significant location, like as it relates to the question. Like if the question is about how will my court date go, maybe you'll use the location of the courthouse, something like that. And so the star chart is prepared for the moment, and then it's read and interpreted from there. And first thing you have to do are make considerations to see if the chart is even readable. And the way you do that is you check like what's located in the first house. Does that represent the querent? Does it make sense? Is whatever's in the first house that represents the person who's asking the question? And if that doesn't align, you know, so if that person, that the question and the energy of the question isn't encapsulated by whatever appears in the first house, then probably it's a dud chart and you should try again at a later time, or pick an arbitrary time from the past. Maybe that wasn't the moment that it first occurred to them to ask the question. Maybe that moment happened yesterday, and that's the chart you should use then. The moment when the question becomes unbearable and they have to know the answer. And then after that first house, which, you know, in regular astrology would normally have been like the self, right? So that's the only one that doesn't make sense. The rest of them then are just the same house meetings that they would have been in natal astrology. So the first one gauges if the chart works or not, and the rest of them follow the same rules that they always do. And that's horary astrology, divinatory astrology, very useful. I'll say that. So one time, here's an example of this. One time I had a dream that this sounds crazy, but I had a dream that New Jersey was flooding, and my friend's beach house that we always go to was like up on a cliff for some reason, but otherwise it was like very similar to his beach house now. And the whole lower part of the town was flooding, except it was a much larger city, and it had subtle differences that were not that significant, but it was still just like New Jersey was like basically 60 feet of water, like higher than usual, and it's totally flooded, and like the beach is gone now basically, and it's like that wasn't even the worst of it. So that was from a bad storm, and everyone was like stranded in the highest floors of the tallest apartments, and that wasn't the worst of it. I saw something move in the water, and it looked like a tentacle, like from a giant sea monster, from like a Cthulhu type monster. It turned out to be the actual Cthulhu, who then I met him, like we were speaking, you know, with our minds. And I was like, why are you doing this? And he was like, well, every 5,000 years we come up from the depths of the ocean to lay our eggs. Again, this is where we lay our eggs. Last time we came up, nobody lived here. And so I had to like negotiate with Cthulhu in the dream for the survival of humanity, which I don't think is like ever gonna actually happen, right? That'd be like crazy ego. But so to me, what it meant was there was a bad storm coming that would bring like a lot of chaos bad to the world, but it wasn't something that that was unnatural. It was something that we should have expected. And so then I did some rune stones. I cast rune stones, which means I just threw them at the ground. And then I interpret which way to read them using considerations. It's actually the exact same technique as used here in astrology, except instead of looking at the house, I just look at you know, the context and the overall shape and see if it makes sense. And it did. I don't remember exactly all the details, but the outcome of the reading was basically that there was going to be a really bad natural disaster caused by global warming, caused by climate change, and the region of the world it was going to happen in was in the Americas. And so then I calculated, I counted up all the runestones that showed up that were face up, and I got 2 as the base number. And I was like, okay, so 2 months perhaps, maybe it's in 2 months. Let me see what the sky looks like. So tying it back into astrology, let me see what the sky looks like in 2 months. So I sat down at Stellarium, I plugged in 2 months from then, I looked at, you know, it was like 2 months and a week, and it would be like a full moon, plus a bunch of retrogrades, you know, plus, you know, the planets would be here and there, and I don't remember all the details, but I just was like, okay, I think whatever is going to happen, it's coming at the full moon in this month, in August, or whatever it was. I think it was August. And then the hurricane, I think this was last year, not this past summer, but the one before that. That was the year that hurricane came along and flattened Puerto Rico, and it came 2 days after I said it would. So that is the power of astrology. Like, I could never have come up with that date myself because it's very specific, and the more specific the information you're trying to divine, then the greater the risk of getting it wrong, of believing one thing when it's really the other. And so astrology really can help clarify on it, because the movements of the planets definitely affect things like weather, which are already very chaotic processes that have to do completely with movement of water, and the movement of water is affected by gravity from the moon and from the other planets. So that's why astrology plays such a role. So astrology is a really powerful tool for predicting when something will happen. So I used, you know, the dream told me something is going to happen. The runes told me what would happen, and astrology told me when. And that is where astrology really fits into this divination pattern. Okay, so the last kind of astrology to mention, this one is medical astrology. There's 2 types. two common types anyway that I've heard of. The one type is predicting health issues based on the natal chart. So like the sign position of the sun could indicate the nature of lifelong afflictions. For instance, so for me, I have, Pisces has something to do with the feet, aligns with the feet, and Aquarius with the knees. My Aquarius and Pisces are rising. Guess what two parts of my body I have the most problems with? My knees and my feet. I have all sorts of issues, like weak knees, and I have psoriasis in my feet, so all sorts of issues. So the natal chart can be used to determine what types of afflictions someone will struggle with throughout their life, as well as possibly even, rather, the cause of death if there's a force that's strong enough in the chart. It's very hard to know exact cause of death, time, place, stuff like that. It can be done with astrology, probably. I haven't done it, but it'd be very challenging to know like the exact details. But general things like what kind of ailment will get you in the end, that's something that you might be able to tell. So for instance, Leo, that's where my sun sign is mostly. So Leo is with the heart and spine. So maybe my issue will be that I'll have a heart attack or something. My heart will give out. And the cool thing about this is, I mean, that's not cool, but the cool thing about this is too, like my moon is in Virgo, which is GI tract issues, and I have the worst issues with allergies and all sorts of issues like that. So where all of my planets are located in the chart, I do actually have a bunch of health afflictions that are related to those signs. And I bet other people probably will have similar experiences, if not now, at some point during their life. Sickness may also present through the 6th house. Some people have said that. Some people use the sun. I think that really it's just all of the signs and planets associate with body parts, and different ones have different significance depending on where they're all located in the chart. So it's going to be different for every person, and every sign or planet might play a role. Excuse me. Okay, so the other type of medical astrology is basically horary astrology, but for medical moments. So you use interrogations, the moment of a heart attack, the time that you checked into the hospital, or the time that you received the diagnosis for cancer, say, or something like that. Then you could do a chart based on that moment to hopefully see what the outcome is going to be. Is it going to be very severe? Are you going to die from it, or will you recover? And as with all forms of divination, not just will I recover, but what do I need to do? What kinds of energy do I need to focus on or bring into my life to ensure that I recover? Because 90% of the battle is mental when it comes to these conditions, because they have medical treatments and you need the treatments also. Okay, no kookiness in here saying not to see a doctor if you have cancer. That's crazy. See a doctor, do the treatments, but as they say, the people that most likely survive are the ones that believe they will, that have a reason to, that are fighting for it, not the people that are given up and are fatalistic and will away the last few years of their life. Likewise, perfectly healthy people can become unhealthy by not having the will to live. When my grandfather passed away, my grandmother on my dad's side just whiled away the days but in front of her TV, eating almost nothing, TV dinners, and just waiting to die because she didn't want to live without him. And in a way, that's really sweet. And in another way, it's kind of morose. But, she died very young with no health issues. She passed in her sleep one night in her 70s. She was not old. She was like 73. So that can happen. People love to make fun of Star Wars for it, but people can lose the will to live, and that can be enough to kill people. It really can. It's not always as quick as it's shown in that movie series, but slowly over time, the will to live is a very important thing. And likewise, you see the opposite with my grandmother on my mom's side, right? Like my grandfather passed in his 70s because of heart issues, a congenital heart defect. And she keeps living like, she's a young thing. She goes out to movies and she's exercising and, active, and she doesn't stop. And for that reason, she's stayed very young and very active. And she just has a very different view on it. Like, I have to live and be happy because that's what my husband would have wanted, that sort of mentality. So that's medical astrology. It can be used both as horary, as divinatory astrology to predict something, the outcome of medical issues, or it can be used to predict what types of medical issues someone will have based on their natal chart. So it's really like adding on to either natal or horary. It's not really its own thing, but there you go. So that's it for the course. We've talked about the zodiac, the planets, the houses, aspects. I've given a couple examples of reading and interpreting natal charts. We talked about the different kinds of astrology, other applications for this knowledge that don't just involve natal charts. If you have any questions, you can always email us at covenantoftheopenmind@gmail.com. If you'd like someone to do your chart professionally, I do those. Again, that's on our marketplace on our website. So you can check that out. And otherwise, thanks for learning with us, and I hope that this has been helpful to you. The last section of homework here covers many of the different types of astrology. It also talks about meteorological, numerology, palmistry, so many different kinds of astrology. It gives you a full overview on electional and horary. Some of it is very dense, so I skimmed it myself. But I also wanted people to read about the age of Aquarius, which our whole world will be entering into in the next 200 years or so. Depending on who you ask, we're already in it. So that's all just good background information for you guys to fill in the gaps here. So hopefully this has been helpful. I love learning with you guys. We'll talk about the next course is going to be on our channel, but I'm going to be taking a short break for now and focusing on finishing my book on Wicca. So hopefully that'll be out soon. Thanks for watching, and from all of us here at the Covenant of the Open Mind, blessed be.